that just met in Alhambra just a few weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. Yeah, 4 weeks ago today we met. And one of the presenters who is involved with assisting our Metropolitan Archbishop with the youth and family ministry of our archdiocese, he presented this book. I thought, this sounds familiar. And when he said the name of the author, Archbishop Alberti, I knew the book. Because of a young man who converted from Methodism in the 1950s, Eugene Rose, had said something about him in his writing, his life story, and what a good teacher he was. And then I remember I heard about this guy, so we must get this book. And instantly we had to get it. But I was a little bit worried that it would be a big, thick tome with footnotes and, intimidating. I was very pleased to see that it's a small book and that it has very readable organization, and it's written in a style that's very accessible to everyone. That really pleased me. So I'm very grateful for Father Nicholas Belcher bringing it to my attention and to others. I just talked to a deacon in the Pacific Northwest. His priest is also using it in his parish. So I think many of us are lay hold of it as a good Lenten access point to aspects of our Lenten discipline, like to illuminate, to shed light on aspects of our Lenten practice, how we intensify our prayer and our Christian action. So Archbishop Averki will be our guide. He will be our leader and guide us through week in, week out. So I'm going to introduce the book tonight, and so as begins any kind of course of applying yourself to learn something, you have to start out with a double homework, okay? So you have to read the introduction, which you would normally have read beforehand, but we're just now meeting for the first time now. And there's more chairs over here, if you like.
Oh yeah, my husband and Lathia are also here.
Okay, all right, so Carol and Amy, you can come over here if you like. You can pull more chairs up too if you like. And then, not only the introduction, but chapters 1 and chapter 2 we'll discuss next week. Okay? Now, there are 12 chapters. Okay? The last one is entitled Pastoral Asceticism, chapter 12. So Lent is 6 weeks long. So 2 chapters a week. And going through Lent, you will have read 142 pages of rather small pages with material that covers the waterfront on what Christian struggle is. So I have high hopes. Even if in a reading like this, you gather a little bit, it will be very, very fruitful for you. It will be like putting fertilizer into the soil of your soul. And that will stimulate growth, it will stimulate love of God and a desire for the divine when you see how this works and how God in His mercy works and what He wants to show us. Okay? If you haven't gotten the book, they're all sold out, I'm told, by our bookstore guy, Jeremiah. He's already ordered 20 more. So I anticipate those will come rather quickly. So we do what we can to make up for that. The title of the book, The Struggle for Virtue, Asceticism in a Modern Secular Society. And it's a very attractive title for a host of reasons. Father Nicholas, when he introduced the book to us, he read a paragraph from the book. He didn't tell us from where it was coming. He didn't tell us when it was written, anything like that. He just read the paragraph, and it sounded like just yesterday. Some Christian teacher, an Orthodox teacher, giving us like a reading from some book that's brand new. And he said, guess when this was written? And I asked, he said, 1956. I was a 5-year-old boy. That's 2 generations ago. In the middle of the 20th century. Here we are, almost a quarter of the way through the 21st century. And it's just real, the reading of it. When I heard that read, I thought, wow. So he's really got a pulse on the pastoral needs of modern people. We live now centuries after the collapse of the old world, when people lived close to the land, close to animals, and in a natural rhythm of life. All of the Orthodox Church and its cycle of worship and its prayer assumes this. I have a big fat book in there, it's actually several volumes, with prayers for all the different needs that human beings have. Most of the time we never even go to that book. Because we don't have that world anymore. Prayer for bees and apiaries, a prayer for the planting season and that the harvest will be blessed. A prayer for rain, the sending of rain, so that the ground will be moistened, so that the plants that are put in there will grow. Because if they don't grow, people will die of starvation. I mean, these rhythms of life that have been millennia, ancient times, all the way down until the beginning of the mechanical industrial revolution. That was humanity, and close with the animals. I think that's why people like Westerns and things like that, because all the horses, people, like you get on your steed, right? There's no shift, there's no levers. You just tickle the horse's side and off you go. If the horse is spirited, you've got a problem on your hand, and so on. Well, there's prayers for all of these things, and we human beings have been alienated a bit from our environment. I would say quite a bit. And so some of the struggles that are mentioned in our Orthodox Church wisdom, we're not aware of those struggles. Like we don't know really what hunger is and how self-denial, a struggle for self-denial having to do with fasting, how that makes sense in our life. You can go out and have, I call it Pharisee pizza. It's all, quote, copacetic, diet-wise, flour, tofu, and all that stuff, and it looks like pizza. And we have all kinds of fake this, fake that, in order to negotiate the vagaries of life in a way that will make it less painful and less of an upset for us. This is brand new. This didn't exist before plastics, right? In the middle of the 20th century. And I remember even coming of age, I used to complain about plastic food, me and my young compadres back in the 1960s. I could go on at length about that, but there's some universals. Basically, one of the universals is that life that's worth living involves struggle, and that a life without struggle has no meaning. It has no fiber to it. I was sitting with Linda and some others at the table, and she asked how I'm doing, and I said this and that and this and that. And I could tell that she was thoughtfully asking, not just filling the air with small talk, but she was saying, how are you doing? How is it? And I said, well, life's up and downs are getting to me a little bit. And she said, oh, and she listened. And then I said, but without those ups and downs, there could be no bark on your life. You could develop no sure armor in life to weather the storms of life, right? Asceticism, or the struggle that we're talking about here, the Lenten asceticism, is a willful engagement with the stuff of life that forms serious character, that will endure past the death of the body. That's what Christian asceticism It involves an engagement of the free will. So there's two ways in which asceticism can work. There's willful asceticism, where you take up a task that nobody's pushing on you, and you're going to do it. It would be like if you were living in a cold climate and a snowstorm came, you have no control over that, and the wife says to you, "Oh, honey, get the snow shovel out, you need to shovel the sidewalk." I have no choice in the matter. I can't boast and say, "Look at me, I'm like engaging in ascetical endeavor." It's like, get your butt out there and move the snow out of the way, right? What? Oh, I'm sorry, I quoted you, I didn't mean it. Anyway, then there's the involuntary asceticism of things that come upon us that we didn't will, like maybe a sickness, and enduring sickness or physical privation or pain without complaining, right? And how well we do with that tells us a lot about us, or poorly, tells us an awful lot about ourselves, and we can gain a very great deal from the struggle to go through something that we didn't pick to go through. Maybe a demotion or a rejection, or like you have a relationship that's very meaningful for you, and that person spurns you, or some work that you're doing that's not accepted and you're rejected, or you apply for a job and you're turned down, these kinds of things. Everybody goes through these things, and one can learn a great deal from going through them, or one can fight in a bad way, that is, like, blame everyone else around them for their problems and never learn anything. Well, so struggle has a couple of edges here. In the end of the day, it's the struggle, not just to struggle. I hear people say that a lot. "Oh, Father, I'm struggling with," and fill in the blank. And I always respond, always, I never fail to do this. I always respond, well, struggle is a good thing. It depends how you're facing that struggle. That's really everything. If you're running away from it, that's not a good thing. If you're facing it with a kind of an egotistical, I'm going to fight this and I'm going to win, that could be very tough. But if we face everything with trust in divine providence, good things will happen. So it's the struggle for virtue. Now, what is virtue? I'm opening the floor now to you. When it says struggle for virtue, what do you think of when you hear the word virtue?
The greatest value of life.
For example.
Freedom.
All right, freedom. Okay.
To make choices, personal choices.
All right. Others of you?
Well, there's the classical virtues, temperance, courage, things like that. And then there's the Christian virtues, love, hope, and
Okay.
faith.
And you're speaking out of the ethical tradition that's so large in our civilization. These are marvelous things. So you have the ancient Roman virtues of temperance, courage, fortitude, prudence, and wisdom, right? And then you have the theological virtues, faith, hope, and love. This is an excellent underscoring of this. So how do you learn courage? Courage isn't automatic. You have to face some problems and stand up to them. Right? What's the opposite of someone who's courageous? A coward. Someone who runs away from the problems. How do you know that you're one or the other? When you face the challenge. So these things, temperance has to do with self-control. We could look at all of those things, but we're on the right path with this kind of comment. Linda points out to freedom as a virtue. Perhaps freedom would be a social virtue that's fortified by those who together work on that, right? So the word virtue means power. It literally means power, or manliness, literally. The Latin word vir, V-I-R, means man, as opposed to woman, okay? So virtus means the quality of being manlike, manly, okay? That doesn't mean that women can't have virtue, of course they can. Because at this level, we're not talking about sex, we're talking about quality. We're talking about a certain kind of a strength of soul, if you will, manliness of soul. The human soul is not sexual, it's above that. The body is the sexual part. So the virtue is what it means to be truly human, the makeup of what it means to be truly human. And these things are acquired through struggle. They literally are acquired through struggle. Okay? So the struggle for virtue, and then this curious word is introduced in the subtitle, Asceticism in a Modern Secular Society. I underlined that word, ascetics, asceticism, and I thought, and he will deal with this in the introduction when you read it, he will explain that very carefully, what he means by asceticism and what an ascetic is. But now most of you have not read the introduction, so let me ask you to pipe up and tell me what you think an ascetic is, and what is asceticism, or the practice of being an ascetic. What is this? What are we talking about here? Or maybe you could say what we're not talking about. Or maybe you could say, well, this is always what I thought it was, but I don't know if that's true. We're starting now with these basic terms so we know what we're getting into. What is asceticism? What is an ascetic? How is it that those words hook your thinking? Like what's going on in your mind when you hear those words? Yeah, John.
A discipline?
Discipline? Can you say a little more about that?
A discipline to train yourself to so that the flesh will not overtake the spirit.
Okay. So, discipline, the word suggests like what a student does. The teacher says this and that, and the disciple does what disciples do. They do the discipline, right? They do whatever the task is given. Like practice these math problems. Is that what you mean by that?
Yes, just to be to watch over how you live and how you react, and discipline yourself so that you will not be a prisoner of your own vices.
Okay. Yes.
I might be wrong, but usually when I think about asceticism, I think about like purposely making yourself uncomfortable or denying yourself of some things that probably would keep you satiated, like almost making you uncomfortable enough so that you can be attentive or something like a. So like, because when I'm satiated, I'm kind of distracted, like I'm at ease and at peace in a way, and so maybe a discomfort almost makes me like.
Can you think of a common example of that in your life that is effective?
Like standing in church.
Like standing
That's what that's why I said, like,
There's a proverb that says, a hungry belly urges on the work. Have you heard this proverb before? Like, so you're hungry, you have a task to do, so you hurry up the job so you can get to eat, right? Now, you can shortcut that and just drop everything and say, well, forget all this, I'm hungry, I'm leaving. Okay, but the ascetic will say, yes, I need to finish this job, but I'm hungry, so I will work harder and faster in order to get it done. so I can go attend to my bodily needs. Would that be something like what you're talking about? I'm trying to make it more general than just church practices,
Yeah.
because we need a general arena for this to make sense. If it's just really narrowly looking at various
I'm thinking
ecclesiastical
Or
practices.
like, I'm purposely keeping myself kind of in a state of hunger so that I can, like, be attentive to how I am with food. Or like, be the master of that food, or like, I don't know exactly how to say it,
Okay,
but
all
something
right.
in that direction.
There is a wisdom among the ascetics that one pushes the plate away before they get to satiety in order not to become drowsy. But in this day and age, because of our mechanical preoccupation, it can easily turn into a problem, you know, and especially for young people, because images are put in front of them that are not realistic. So we have to be careful about that. Fasting is fraught with all kinds of problems in our current culture. So we'll have to study that particular at some point.
Or maybe like anything else, like waking up earlier than you would prefer, so that you are kind of mindful of the time. Like
Yes.
it makes you mindful of the time when you put a time limit on yourself,
Okay.
something like that.
Yes. Okay. These are ascetical approaches to life that have an end in view that's very, very profitable. You were going to say something, Nate.
I would say practices of various sorts, like to be a good pianist, there's a kind of asceticism involved in practicing that set of skills that will lead to your ability to play. Practicing the language, practicing sports of various types, there's
That's right.
Learning skills.
things like that come to mind when I think about asceticism. More generally than just church.
Very good. And this is getting very close to the key meaning of ascesis. In Greek, the word ascesis suggests training or drilling. Like I mentioned, drilling on math problems when I was talking. He's mentioning now music, learning a musical instrument, or learning how to master a certain musical instrument. That's why usually these are offered to children when they're young, so that they have time in their life to develop to the point where it starts giving them dividends. I remember one piano student that I knew, a young lady, and she would practice all the time. She was very good at it, and gained a lot of facility with the instrument. She didn't like to show it off very much, so unfortunately we had to spy on her to hear the music. Remember?
Yes.
But she was very effective, and that ascesis of, up and down the scales, and learning chords and playing them until your fingers are sensitive to them, that takes a lot of ascetical endeavor, doesn't it? Okay. But the issue here is modern secular society, today's world, an industrial world with lots of aids that give us the instant access to things that our great-grandparents could never even dream of, right? You could call somebody in Yemen right now and talk to them.
They'll be sleeping though.
What?
They'll be sleeping.
I know. Like, why are you waking
You know,
up?
you know.
Well, actually, it's tomorrow morning, almost. So, they can only dream of these things. For example, when I was growing up, my mother would say, write your thank you notes for the Christmas gifts you got. And we learned how to write a little note on a card, put it in the mail, put a stamp on it, and send it to our grandparents, or whoever else sent it, to our aunt, or whatever, who sent us something, thanking them in writing. Now, no one does that. If they do, they just go a little email like, thanks for the whatever, you know. And so there's a bit of an ascesis involved, and those who received the notes at the other end knew that you took the time to do that and you made some expenditure of your effort. Especially, you could go to a stationery store and buy, you know, the special paper with a pen that wrote a certain way, and that would make a big impression on, and it was about making those impressions because it was considered gracious to do that. Those things took time, they took attentiveness, and they took concentration off of oneself onto the other person. So it was very, very valuable. Right? So in our modern society, we have a weakened sense about the work it takes to affect real useful involvement with whatever our activities are, because everything is done for us. I remember in the 1950s, they were espousing the all-electric kitchen. And the house that we live in Claremont now was built in 1956, and they were proud about the fact that you had built into the counter of the kitchen was this blender thing. You put the thing right into the counter, and you turn the knob, and whoopee, you have a blended drink just like that. You didn't even have to store it. It's like,
I saw that, somebody came and bought it.
of course they did, because they're romanticizing about the time when that was the world. Secular. So society is no longer a God-believing society and a God-honoring society, but we've forgotten all about God and banished him from our midst. Now, I'm not saying individually. You're all here because you're Christians and you're anticipating the struggle of this newest cycle that we're going through, Lent, and that's why you're here and you're studying that. But think of all the people that are driving up and down these roads that are flailing about in their life with no sure sense of the meaning of life. They're secular people. They have only the mind to think of, they live in this age only. They live only for this time. And that when they die, that's it, and they're gone. And the body's put into a blender, and then into a jar, and then that's it, and there's no more. Right? That's secularism. And Archbishop of Berkeley knew he was dealing with this, even in his Christian community in upstate New York in the 1950s. When he wrote this, he was an abbot of Holy Trinity Monastery in Jordanville, New York. That's up like right in the middle of the state of New York. Most people think of New York City, but there's this whole state really out there. And the secular mindset is very dull, and people who live in that world are suffering inside terribly. They have no sure purchase. They spend a lot of money going to counselors and seeking answers to their deep felt problems. And they're given a pill, and then they go on from there. Remember, the moderns, we have a pill or a button to push. Push the button or take a pill, and your problems are solved. I remember one doctor telling me, well, I can fix your problem. You can do this or that, or I can give you a pill. I'll take the pill. It's the usual answer. I asked him, I said, how many people take the pill you offer? He said, almost all.
Or they even go to the doctor to ask for a pill, even if it's not conducive to their condition, but they still want that pill.
Yeah, and pharmacists like Dahlia here will tell that these pills are in high demand, and many people come again and again to get the newest like load of them that they live off of. And there is a truth that even taking a pill with nothing in it, just the act of taking the pill, the placebo effect, is an interesting phenomenon all by itself.
I mean, roughly a 33% efficacy rate for placebos, which Oddly enough, it also works for, or at least one study shows that it could also potentially work for surgeries.
I'm not surprised by anything.
You don't need to be cut up, but we're gonna cut you up. You'll feel better.
Okay.
That's right, have your way with me. No, I feel better. So, a struggler, let's ward off some misconceptions right away. A struggler is not a factor, not somebody who's like a Hindu trying to kill off the body, or to render it inert, or to destroy it. God gave us bodies as part of our makeup as human beings. So we're not talking about a war against the body. That is not the Christian way. Christian asceticism is not about fighting the natural passions of the body. By natural passions, I'm not talking about sins here. I'm talking about the natural movements of our body. As St. Paul says to the Ephesians, no man ever hated his flesh, but he nourishes it and cherishes it. That's, by the way, in the context of the mystery of marriage, right? So in the care of one's body, there's nothing wrong with that. And the proper nurture of the body, the feeding of our body, exercising of it, and the care of the body, getting enough sleep, enough to eat, and proper drink and rest, all of these things are important for us Christians, for all human beings. So asceticism has nothing to do with fighting against the healthful demands of the body. It's nothing to do with it. And times when I have, as a pastor, usually it comes up in a confession and starts like this. Father, I'm just not keeping the fast. And I know what's coming next. It's like, I can't eat chips all day long. I said, well, you shouldn't be eating chips all day long. It reminds me of when I was a teenager, and I remember one day I lived on a bag of Fritos. That's my whole meal that day. I felt horrible as a result. But that's just not healthy. You should eat a healthy diet of foods that are good for you. Keep in mind the fasting of Daniel and the three holy youths. Right, this is recorded in the prophecy of Daniel. Go there and read all about it. They argued with the king of Babylon, and they said, Sire, let us eat just the regular foods that are good for us, like the vegetables and the things that are just naturally good. And you will see that we will be more healthy than eating your rich, select meats and drippings and all of that, right? And they were healthy, and they showed that. One cannot read into that text that they were just stopped eating. As a matter of fact, Ambrose of Milan warned his faithful. He was one of the great fathers of the 4th century. And he said, I don't want to hear any of you fasting more than a day, maximum, strictly fasting. If you do that, then you must come to me and talk to me. And he would tell them not to do that. Augustine of Hippo would serve wine at every meal, even in Lent. Now I'm not telling you all to be wine bibbers, but I'm showing you that the church fathers had a very, very sweet sense about humanity. And they had a very beautiful feeling for the fullness of life that God gave us in this world. So self-denial is important, but self-denial that's wise actually is very healthy for us. Excess is a problem, right? There's no question that if you eat a lot of calories and don't get enough exercise, you're going to be physically unhealthy over time. It will develop that. It is also true that if you exercise too much and keep a very strict diet, that you're probably going to have other health problems. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, he died on a healthy regime of fruit and whatever. He died young, like in his 50s. He already did it. He's too hard on himself. I read his biography, I read about that. And the founder of, what was her name, Christina, the woman that did the health food thing back in the 1960s and 70s?
Jane Fonda.
No, not Jane Fonda, works out, but some,
I don't know. I just think-
no,
Was
she,
that Adele something?
yeah, Adele, whatever.
Davis, maybe.
And she died young because she overdid
She
it.
got cancer.
Yeah, she got
And the head, at the Claremont Club, the head guy
Yeah,
that, over the, what do you call it, the personal trainers,
yes,
had a sudden heart attack one morning, went out for jogging.
Yeah.
He just pushed himself
too hard.
He was older, you know.
Yes, but not that old.
No, I was.
No, I'm not saying everything's reducible to that, but I'm saying asceticism is not the attempt to kill the body. You will see that in the introduction, he asserts that. That means that the Christian action that is indicated in Lent, there's three legs to that Christian action: prayer, fasting, and works of mercy, are all to be in moderation, according to one's ability and according to one's temperament. Saint Cosmas of Etolia, his picture used to be on the wall back there, it might be over there somewhere. He's the little Greek guy with the Greek hat. He's back there somewhere. He was martyred in 1776, easy to remember his departure for us Americans. He used to say, for one man, 200 grams of bread a day is too strict to fast. And for another man, 200 grams a day is surfeit. It's like excess. It depends on the person's disposition and what they do with themselves and how much physical, intellectual, and like the mode of life. Someone who works physically all day long needs more food than somebody who sits at a desk, that kind of thing. So one must know oneself, and this kind of measured approach to life where, with guidance from someone who knows you well and helps you craft a plan of struggle according to God, and an ascetical path that works for you where you are, and at the age you are, and adjusting that as you grow older. Maybe you're a young person, and it's really easy for you to fast. And then when you get older, it's not so easy. And maybe you've discovered the mystery of denying yourself, eating foods, and then your prayer becomes stronger. And then you realize, oh, that's why we fast. So the body becomes calm. And I'm not fighting digestive juices all day long, right? So when I'm a little bit hungry, as Inez pointed out a moment ago, I'm maybe physically my body's telling me to eat, but I'm not starving. I'm just denying myself so that in the calmness of my bodily temperament, it's easier to pray. And I find that my soul within me moves toward God easier because it's not distracted by all of the processes that are going on in the body, right? For example, I'm kind of an active guy, so I exercise. I try to get enough exercise every day. I need it, especially as I get older. And I found that it's not easy for me to pray after I exercise because my body is very stimulated by that. I feel wonderful, but it's not a prayerful feeling, right? So I have to balance that over with what my needs are as a man of prayer. I have to figure that one out. So I have my way of approaching. This means that we have to know ourselves, and this is the foundation for any true spiritual struggle, to know oneself. When we're very young, we have no idea who we are. So we listen to our parents tell us, you know, honey, you're very active and you need to get out there and move. Honey, you're very weak, you're very sensitive. Why don't you take time and just read? Just sit quietly and read. Don't fret about everything. It depends on the person, right? So we have to know our environment. There was an ancient, one of the great ancient Greek sages taught this expression, know thyself. You can find it inscribed in many ancient Greek places like in the Delphic Oracle in Delphi in Greece. There it is. Dunophi safton. There it is, written right there. Know thyself. What does that mean? I don't know myself. When I look inside myself, I'm horrified. I can barely stand being with myself most of the time because I'm aware of all the ways I stick my foot in my mouth or whatever. We all know this feeling in ourselves from time to time. But truly knowing oneself comes from a direct encounter from the one who knows our hearts, and that's Jesus Christ. When we know ourselves in Him, then everything is fine. Then we can see ourselves without fear. We can stand in His presence and, Lord, search out the hidden chambers of my heart. Search me and know me. Thou knew me when I was being fashioned in my mother's womb, right? When we have this kind of perspective, then the struggle for virtue becomes a very, I won't say doable, but I'll say approachable task. Because it still can be intimidating, right? I mean, here we have the hymns of the church. Let me give you an example. This is the one just started now. O peoples, let us greet the fast with joy. Yippee! We get to fast. For the beginning of the spiritual struggle is at hand. Let us lay aside the comforts of the flesh. Let us make God's gifts of grace increase within our soul. Let us suffer with Christ as His servants, that we may be also glorified with Him as children of God. And may the Holy Spirit dwelling in us all give light to our souls. That's the very first hymn for the very first Lenten day that we just had in our service here. We just had that. That's on the eve of the first day of like, O Lord and Master of my life, take from me the spirit of sloth. That's the first word out of her mouth. So what is sloth? In the light of what we're talking about, what is that? Sloth.
Laziness.
Yeah, and in the light of what we're all talking about, how does that fit with what we've just been talking about?
Not struggling.
Forget it. No struggle for me, thank you very much. That's sloth. That's spiritual sloth. Now we think of the spiritual sloth as a couch potato, right? I mean, there's like, Mr. Do Nothing. Like that PBS show where Mrs. Bouquet and what was that PBS show? Keeping Up Appearances, right?
Oh, yeah.
And there was her brother-in-law, who is always sitting on the couch in his t-shirt, just drinking beer and watching TV. That's a picture of sloth, right? I mean, such a nice picture. And it's so far from any one of us that we can say, well, that's just not me. I'm not slothful. But ask me to keep the fast. Oh, no. For health's sake, I must put that half and half in my coffee. I mean, you know all the games we play.
Egg whites, baby.
All right. So all of these little tricks that we play on ourselves to ward off the inevitable discomfort from a regime that we are not having forced on us, because remember, the fathers of the church taught us never to interrogate one another and never to nosy our way into other people's ascetical endeavor. It's none of our business. I would like it to be my business, because I want to know, can I judge this person? Can I get an excuse for my own slothfulness by watching their slothfulness? You know, that kind of thing. But God help us, this is not a good match. So, the struggler is not one who hates the body. We're not Platonists, we're not Hindus, we're Christians. God created us with a living soul, the whole man, flesh, and which is called the flesh, and that means body and soul together as a compact unity. Okay. So not hating the body or the flesh, but loving God in the body, which is a temple of the Holy Spirit. All right, now you know as well as I do that everything I said has to be qualified, because you're going to say, oh, but Father, and you could walk right over to that chanter stand, open the Synaxarium, and on any day hear the grisly details of the martyrs and the ascetics, how they want, like the Syrian Simeon Stylites, Simeon of the pillar. He lived on top of a column, 100 feet off the ground. I mean, what? I mean,
I find that very hard to imagine. I try to imagine.
actually, it started low and he kept on going higher over the years. And it got to where he was over 100 feet high. The emperor himself came to visit. The emperor of the Romans came to visit. He was well known all over the ancient world. He was like a phenom, you know. He was well known. There's just no guy hidden in the corner, and he was filled with God. He was like a you know, you go out in the desert and have these big collecting solar collectors, you know, renewable energy. There's wind farms and then these solar farms too, right? Have you seen them?
Yes.
It's amazing what they can do. Well, imagine a man collecting the sun, the divine, the light of God, and broadcasting. So we have this in our tradition. But these are people who are so pure, they've attained such heights that we can only wonder. They're wonders to us. Most of us don't live at that level. We're not St. Anthony, you know. We have to learn how to live this in a way that is according to moderation. That's what St. Paul said, let your moderation be known to all men. So we're not Platonic. We're not Manichaeans, hating the body. We're not Hindus, killing off the body and starving it so as to get it to shuck off and then leaving just the soul behind. But rather, we're converting the passions, the disordered movements of our life into virtues. It is a conversion, not a killing off. St. Maximus the Confessor is very, very powerful about this in his teaching. True apatheia, which is the end of struggle, when you're completely free from passion, doesn't mean you turn into a robot. You stop being human. It means you're filled with divine life, and you're no longer living for yourself, but you're living in God completely. And there has been an offloading of ego and an onloading of God. An offloading of self-interest and an onloading of God interest. That's what the exchange of the Lenten struggle is all about. It is an exchange. I'm offloading my sins, my passions, my struggle, my, right? I'm offloading that, and I'm taking on God's grace. So, then what does spiritual mean, except the basis of our whole human life in God, who is spirit, right? Jesus said, God is spirit, and those that worship him must worship in spirit and truth. So, a couple questions for you. Is it good to fast? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, fasting means, according to St. John the Roman, St. John Cassian the Roman, he lived in the 5th century. He said exactly correctly. fasting means to eat less food. So a good basic rule for fasting, right, there's these three legs, right? Fasting, prayer, alms, right, mercy. So we're talking, and Jesus said they all should be done in secret, and they all should be done unto God. So this is, Jesus assumes that we're living this way. So fasting, prayer, and mercy. So it is good to fast, but is it good to fast intensely? The way I phrase the question might prejudice a little bit your answer. So I'll get rid of the word but. Is it good to fast intensely?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Depends on the person.
Know thyself.
Pardon?
It depends on the person.
Yes. Intensely means with effort, right?
Okay, well then everybody.
I personally cannot fast unless I make a big effort to do so. I will fail if I don't take it intensely. I know I will fail. I'm just gonna go get a bag of chips and ruin it, you know. Yes, I kept the diet, but I'm ruining the spirit of it, you know. Yes, ma'am.
Well, there's one thing that, are you gonna be talking about the introduction?
Yeah, this is
after
all
this?
stuff coming from the introduction.
Well, there's one thing that came out when I
Go
read
ahead.
it. Okay, so this really struck me, and I don't know if it will affect anybody else that way, but he says, Lord, Lord, who shall enter the kingdom of heaven? But he who does the will of my Father. And then he says, if you love me, keep my commandments. Therefore, the fulfillment of the evangelical commandments or the performance of good works is an essential foundation for the spiritual life. So I read that and I thought, okay, tomorrow when I get up, I'm gonna do this. Do you know how hard it is to, if you give yourself over to the Holy Spirit and say, okay, I'm yours today. What can I do? What's before me? Put something before me that I can do that will be pleasing to you. Well, then that means the other stuff that I spend all my time doing, I don't get to do anymore. And that's an act of asceticism. So if I get up in the morning and I say my prayers before I open Facebook, that sounds like a little thing, but that's a huge ascetic endeavor. And if I'm so tired, I'm just gonna go to bed. In the name of the Father and the Son, thank you, Lord, for this day. No, if I stand before my icons and pray, a legitimate prayer where I take the time to be in the presence of God, that's an ascetical endeavor. Because my body's tired and I'm used to going to bed when I'm tired, and that's breaking a bad habit. And anytime we do anything to break a bad habit, when I don't overeat, that's monumental asceticism. Because I've been overeating all my life. So anything I do to break a bad habit, or anything I do for the sake of someone else, oh, so-and-so needs something, they need a ride. I had my afternoon all planned. I'm sorry I can't do that for you today, but why don't you call so-and-so? She's probably available. You know, those are the places where I live. I don't live on top of a pillar. I live in a house that needs to be cleaned, and I have a cleaning lady because I'm too slothful. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say, was how powerful that was for me. That if we just do the little things that really turn into these enormous things that change us, and then we begin to really know ourselves. When I try to break my bad habit, then I really realize where my weakness is.
And this is the self-knowledge that's the most important.
Yeah, that's the only way to know yourself, is when you try to do something outside your comfort zone.
Right.
So,
Yes.
anyway, I just wanted, I got so much out of that.
Yes, okay.
He does define it, doesn't he, as the effort to do good works and to break evil habits.
Exactly what I wrote then.
Yeah.
So, the practice of good works, this pursuit is torturous and quite painful. Those are his words. This is ascetical endeavor. This is what God is calling us to. There's the old no pain, no gain, right? That is, if we don't exert a little bit of effort and take the risk of overdoing it, there is a risk involved. We don't know until we do a thing, right? Then that risk will give us a lot of self-knowledge. This is what I think you were talking about, Christina, because we can aspire. Remember, he said there's a battle between the good aspirations and evil habits. And the ascetic struggles always to follow the good aspirations out, follow through on them, and not to give in to the evil habits. I think almost everyone wakes up with the aspiration to do good that day. They think, okay, that's going to happen. God help me. Lord, this day is yours, and I'm here to be your winner. Right. And then, you know what, starts hitting the fan. And then the whole day is like, blah. Like, failure, hey, this work really stinks. Would you redo this? You know, your job's on the line here. Come on, shape up. What kind of a report did you write for this, your English teacher? Like, what were you, watching TV when you did this? Or watching YouTube? Or what's going on here? You know, this kind of knowledge can really drive us nuts, but it's what we need in order to become what God is calling us to be. Right? Ascesis is nothing other than spiritual training. That's what this book is introducing. That's what Archbishop of Berkeley is trying to get across. And he says, this is on page Roman numeral 22, XX11, all right? He says, asceticism is not simply some human invention, displeasing to God as certain enemies of the ascetic life and seek to affirm. On the contrary, it is the only trustworthy and reliable means for realizing the clear and direct will of God for man. If I make no effort to pray, I will never learn about prayer. If I make no effort to roll back the demanding, insistent demands of my body, then I'll never know what true self-control feels like. And I'll never really be in possession of myself. As the proverb says, the man who masters himself is more powerful than he that takes a city. Right? Some general conquering a city. This is only learned through struggle. It's the only way I can learn it. And I need you as my helpers. I desperately need you. I can't do this in isolation. That's the last point I want to hit on this introductory lecture before we have more of a conversation. I need you. You're not just convenient to me. You're my very life, because your struggle, your prayer inspires me. When I hear about some of your prayers and your experiences with God, I walk away inspired, even as a priest. Nothing to do with being a priest or not. I'm a human being like you, and I have my down days when I'm very, very frustrated. But then when I hear you, and I hear your life, and I watch your eyes, and I see your struggle and how you're standing up to it, I'm inspired. It gives me courage. It's like, great, get off your butt and do something. Look at, they're all just struggling and you're just like feeling sorry for yourself. Come on. It's inspiration. This is where the church as a holy community is absolutely indispensable. I'd like to emphasize that point. That's why Christ said, really, at the top of it, he didn't mention anything about fasting. He mentioned love. And he said, one commandment I give to you, that you love one another. That's why we always start the fast, not in a individualistic isolationist fashion, but as a community where we bow to each other and we ask forgiveness of each other. I look at each one of you, you look at me, you all look at each other, and we make that bow and we say, forgive me, the sinner. Even the little children, they look on their faces like a mixture of terror and wonder, right? I'm terrified that I have to make a bow to my neighbor, but I'm also in wonderment because the grace is so strong. God's love is overflowing and giving us everything we need, right? So I want to emphasize that last point. We're not disappearing into the void. Like, yes, there is that solitary aspect of it, no question about it. When I stand before God in prayer, it's just me before God in prayer. All right? But we're not atoms all fragmented out into the universe, just out there drifting. We are locked together as a temple in which the glory of God dwells, the Holy Church. That's the end of my introductory words on this endeavor that we're going to look at. If I say anything more, it's stealing the thunder of the chapters, which you should read. So, now, well, it's 8 o'clock. I've talked a lot because I wanted to inspire you. I hopefully maybe stimulate you a little bit, but maybe we'll just take a couple of minutes for any comments you want to make or any questions about how we're going to proceed, and any details that maybe I've left gone unmentioned.
He talked about at the beginning about the disposition
Yes.
to the struggle. What exactly did he mean by that?
Yes, it has to do with knowing yourself and the kind of personality that you are. Some people are very, very quiet. They keep to themselves. If you tell them to go off and pray in silence, they will have no problem doing that. But that's not a virtue. It's a disposition. It's just what they're used to. But if you tell them, go into the marketplace and give food to all of these hungry people, they'll be terrified. See, I have to go and talk to people? It's terrifying to people like that. Right? It has to do with disposition and measuring oneself. That's why we need each other, because I can't know how to do this unless I'm with people that know me. And somebody can pat me on the back and say, it's okay. No, you need to eat a little more. Just eat this. Well, I'm trying to fast. Yeah, but not for you. You should eat that. Now you, stop. Put that fruit back. You know. Right? Because we know each other. And if we don't judge one another, but we're really looking to help each other, right? Lifting each other up, pulling each other up, kind of, so to speak, then it works well. So the disposition is one thing, virtue is another.
Would you say that when you engage in the ascesis, you're trying to build like a godly disposition or a godly set of character traits or godly
Not
attitudes?
necessarily. When I say disposition, I do mean that word in its fundamental psychological meaning.
Okay.
That a certain aspect or a certain set or a character set that a person has. It can be, you've heard of the nature-nurture thing. It can be you're just naturally a certain way. The ancients had all of the vials and the runes and all that stuff going, all the different kind of characteristics. Psychological typology is still very popular, Myers-Briggs and all that sort of thing. So I mean that when I talk about disposition. That has nothing to do with virtue. But it can easily be understood. People can, they'll say with somebody who's naturally very maybe studious or a loner type, oh, he's very spiritual. Well, not necessarily. You might be just indulging him or herself in some way that you just think it's that way.
The example he gives is the Pharisees. They did good works, but they weren't disposed correctly. They had a poor disposition, they weren't doing it for God.
Oh, and that's now a somewhat different deal. That's religiosity. Religion is the show of virtue. Basically, it's virtue signaling to God. See, aren't I the most wonderful person? Like, I thank thee, O Lord, that I'm not like one of these. Right? Remember the Pharisee? Okay. That stinks, of course. And that stink ascendeth to high heaven. Right? God is very displeased with that. That has nothing to do with personal disposition. It has to do with a perversion. It's a perversion. It's an attempt to show off. That's why all of the aspects of our life, prayer, fasting, our Lord tells us they should all be done in secret. We should hide them. All the saints show us this. All right, I don't want to tax time here, but I do want to make sure I've heard from all of you to start out. We have a good group, and I want to make sure you feel that we're getting something, you're getting a good start. Any questions then? As I said, for some of you who came in a little bit later, we have ordered a bunch more books. If you don't have one, there'll be more coming and showing up soon. And we'll make sure everybody gets one. So, without sounding too teacherish, can I get you please, pretty please with the strawberry on it, could you read the introduction, and then read chapter 1, which is called Self-Asserting Pride and Christian Humility, and then chapter 2 called The Importance of Spiritual Discernment. Just those two. And they're not very big pages, and that will take you up to page 31 in the book. So yes, it's about 50 pages. A little bit each day with a little sign of the cross. Mark your book up. I'm a believer in marking up your books. Talk to the book, let the book talk back to you. Shall we stand up, please? And a special prayer. O Theotokos, the protection of all who ask thy intercessions. In thee do we put our trust, in thee do we boast, in thee is our hope. Pray to thy Son and our Savior, our Lord Jesus Christ, for thine unprofitable servants. Amen. Can I get a few volunteers to grab a chair and just push them all the way back against the wall? And John, if you would be careful that you...
Yeah, I will.
Thank you.